You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
Welcome back to Business of Drinks. I'm Erica Ducey.
And I'm Scott Rosenbaum. Today, we're excited to bring you a conversation with Chris Stephenson. He's the co-founder and CEO of Madre. Madre has quickly become one of the top mezcal brands in the United States. It's still independent, and it competes with such heavy hitters as the corporately owned Del Maguey, Ilegal, and 400 Conejos. The brand holds around 11% market share and is on track to sell around 35,000 9-liter cases this year.
Yeah, that's a remarkable trajectory in a category with hundreds of competing brands. And what makes Madre stand out is how Chris and his team have built it. They spent a full year cultivating community and identity before they sold a single bottle. And that patience really has paid off. Today, Madre consistently leads in retail velocity, often outperforming bigger, better-funded competitors.
Chris also walks us through Madre's product architecture, which to me is absolutely fascinating. Yes, they have a premium sipping mezcal and a bar-friendly espadín, but they also have an RTD that acts as a gateway for new consumers. They even sell a tequila. It's a bold and thoughtful approach to building an agave spirits portfolio.
And there are some great lessons here for founders. You know, how to use community as a secret weapon to break through. Also, why velocity is the most important measure of brand health, and how to build cultural resonance that lasts even when deep-pocketed competitors are trying to buy their ways in.
Chris is full of bold conviction and fantastic insights. So this episode is full of learnings on brand building, particularly in one of the toughest categories in drinks. So let's get into it. Here is our conversation with Chris Stephenson of Madre.
And now, a word from our sponsor.
Listen, if you're launching or growing an alcohol brand, the first half of the year is when importers and distributors are making moves, which means right now is the time to get started in communicating with them.
Yeah, Swig Partners helps brands like yours grow faster and smarter and find the right distribution partners. The team has decades of relationships and is ready to help you succeed.
Right now, our listeners get an exclusive Q4 discount when you sign up before the end of 2025. Mention Business of Drinks and you'll get $300 off your service fee.
So start out the year strong by getting ahead of 2026 goals. Visit swigpartners.com/business of drinks. That's swigpartners.com/business of drinks.
Chris, welcome to Business of Drinks. We are so happy to have you here.
Thank you very much for the invite. I'm a long-time listener, so it's good to be on the other side of the fence.
Thank you again. Let's dive right into it. I'm so excited. Your career, it spans 25 years building brands at all different areas: music, fashion, technology. I'm talking companies like MTV and Xbox that you worked for and with. I'm curious, what was the aha moment? What was the thing that made you decide to transition from building culture for other global brands to co-founding a mezcal brand?
Yeah. Well, I'd always been in culture-based businesses, fashion, music, live music. And actually, as I evolved my career, which is closer to 30 years, actually, I ended up launching a live music company in the festival business, and we took it public in 2013. So I kind of brought all of my my sort of culture, music, fashion, business experience together into this new company, which was called SFX. And after we took the company public, successful public offering, I'd kind of had my fill of corporations. But in that time, in the live music business and in the music business before with MTV and, other businesses, as you're doing events and live music, you realize that they're largely funded, fueled, sponsored by a lot of the spirits and beer industry. So I'd been alongside the spirits and beer industry, even from the earliest days of Jose Cuervo at MTV back in the sort of early 90s, all the way through to, beer sponsorship, spirit sponsorship at the big festivals. When we had the IPO, I left the business. I started an agency consulting some of these bigger corporations. So I was working very closely with Pernod Ricard, the senior management team over there, working on Absolute, Jameson, Kahlua, all sorts of different brands, Chivas Regal, working with Anheuser-Busch, primarily on Corona and Budweiser. And the thing that I realized through all of those experiences was those companies aren't great at, building brands. They're really great at exploding brands and sort of taking them wider. So for me, as a Mezcal fan, through my work with Corona in Mexico, I saw this little sort of white space for Mezcal. I thought it was, an incredible opportunity as a creative consultant, not only to sort of be servicing the client, but also sort of building a brand that they might be interested in the future.
And to that end, were there any lessons that you took from that experience of building these lifestyle and cultural strategies, right, for big legacy brands that helped you prepare to launch something so different like a startup mezcal brand?
Yeah. I think a lot of my experience in music and fashion is really the sort of precursor to how I think about it. I've always had this view of, grassroots marketing and sort of real on the ground marketing. When you're launching new artists, you have to have a micro strategy, a neighborhood strategy, a city strategy. It can't just be everything all at once. Same in fashion. When you're launching fashion brands, you've got to really target, the cultural influences and have the patience and confidence to grow it. And when I look at the big corporations, even when we try to launch new products, the speed at which they need to work, the shareholder returns that you need to have, their quarterly reports, everything works at a different rate. So they don't really have the opportunity to sort of build brands in an authentic way. And I was frustrated on the one side because we were trying to sort of do things in culture with these bigger brands, but management teams would turn over. Revenue wasn't high enough for them to continue to support the product and brand. So in many ways, it was an opportunity to sort of build something from the ground up as I thought it needed to be built. And I've always been about grassroots marketing. I've had big budgets at companies like Microsoft working, on Xbox and different things. And you look at the advertising and the amount of money that can be wasted in advertising if you don't have a core audience. So for me, building that core audience with patience from the ground up was really the critical point.
Pivoting a little bit, you've mentioned, I think in the past, either in writing or interviews, that you kind of identified mezcal to be underserved and kind of a misunderstood category. By my measure, there are a lot of mezcal brands available in the United States, likely more than 500 different brands. So I'm curious, what did you see, when you launched the brand? What market gaps did you see, and how did you feel that Madre would be positioned to fill them?
Yeah. It's true. There's always been a lot of products, in the market. But from my perspective, I would be I'd be in Mexico and I'd think about, what mezcal am I going to drink when I go back? And the only thing that was in my mind was the green bottle, right? And this is going back to 2011, 12, 13, 14, 15, that window of time, way before we started, before we started Madre. So for me, there's plenty of products, but there was no brands. There was no brand that was really, sort of had any cultural sort of connection. Del Maguey was the best in as much as it had sort of grown, had been around for quite a while, but there were a lot of products, but no brands. And I felt that there was an opportunity to sort of build a brand and also tell the story of mezcal, because I think the category itself, was misunderstood. People are thinking, oh, it's way too smoky. It tastes like gas. It's got like a worm or a scorpion, or they had all sorts of different sort of views of what it was. People just didn't understand it. And in the way that I'd experienced it, with a very sort of deep, sort of like almost a spiritual, for me, it was a spiritual experience the first time I tasted it. It came out of the back of a restaurant in Tulum, with Palo Santo sort of pumping off an incense plate, so it's absolutely beautiful. My wife and I are like, wow, this is amazing. So for me, even though there were a lot of products, there was no real brand. And I felt that there was an opportunity to build something that had a little bit more cultural resonance. that would allow us to explore, share the category, in a meaningful way. So that was really my thought. I thought the white space was there was products but no brands.
Fair, fair. I mean, unless I'm mistaken, I believe you're the first mezcal brand that we've had on this podcast, and there's a reason it's taken us so long to feature a brand, which is the category of mezcal is growing in aggregate, but the number of entrants into that category seems to be growing faster. A lot of brands' market shares are stable or shrinking as the pie grows, but the slices get smaller and smaller. So Madre, in this way, is an outlier. It's growing and it's gaining market share. How and why do you believe that's the case?
Audience again. When we launched Madre, it was always about the community. We started this brand in 2016, and we didn't sell our first bottle until 2018. 2017, we were out in the market before we'd sold the bottle, marketing this product to bartenders. We were working the brand. The brand existed in Instagram for a year before we sold the bottle. People saw the bottle and they're like, how do I get this bottle? We resisted actually selling any product for 1 year. We built a community, and when we finally came out, it was unobtainium. People are like, oh my God, I managed to buy it. And there was such a word of mouth, but the brand strength has always come from the fact that we have such a strong base audience. So, to your point on the number of players in the market, there's 4 players, Del Maguey, Ilegal, 400 Conejos, and Madre, that represent about nearly 60% of the market. So let's say Del Maguey has 19, Ilegal has 17, 400 Conejos and us have about 11 or 12%. And then there's a long, long tail of other products and brands, a long, long tail. So your point is absolutely taken. We're the only brand that isn't really it isn't owned by a strategic with very deep pockets. And the reason we're even able to play in that space is not because we have pay for play distribution. We can't play that game. We don't have deep pockets. What we have is an authentic brand that connects with an audience. So we have this consistently high sort of base, and it grows each month, but it's growing off a very authentic base of creative influencers, cultural influencers, and I think we've been fortunate that the chains have recognized us in Nielsen and all the data. They've taken the chance of bringing us in to Safeway, to Ralph's, to Gelson's, to Kroger, to Albertsons, Pavilions. And I think the strength of the brand, just the actual visual brand, has been very powerful in pulling it through. I think that we spend a lot of time and energy on the visual ID of the brand, and that really works to our advantage. If we can get placement, we get the sort of the growth. So we're happy to be 11% of the market without having any of the power of the deep-pocketed strategics. And if we did have the power of the deep-pocketed strategics when we're at that point where we want to sort of grow, I think that's when we'll become the number 1 brand in the mezcal industry.
That's incredibly exciting. I want to touch on something you shared, which is new information to me, which is the brand existed basically for a year prior to the product launching. I'm curious how important that restraint was in maybe learning some things before launching the product for you all.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, we started bringing some product in, and we had a sort of a top list of bartenders, primarily Brooklyn, Venice, Highland Park, Silver Lake. And we tested product. We tweaked the product a little bit in the first year, but not a lot. We started with a much higher percentage of quiche in our product. We had as much as 20% at one point, and we realized that we don't need to have that much expensive, wild, relatively less sustainable than the Espadine. So we actually tweaked the product. Generally speaking, the product didn't really change too much in that time frame. We built an audience. I think we had 15,000 followers on Instagram before people could ever actually taste the product. And 2 of my partners are graphic designers called Land that was really influential in building our brand, because they had a very strong community in graphics, in music, in art, in the agency world. So we were able to take advantage of that momentum as well as a momentum of the product and the bartenders and the brand.
Speaking of the brand, tell me a little bit, if you could, Madre as a brand in a sentence or two. What is it?
Madre is a premium mezcal brand built on authentic culture and community. Bringing that into the brand gives you a sense of how important that, the culture that we've built, the community that we've built, the speed at which we've built it, the patience that you have to build community. You can't go out of the gate and build, an authentic community in 2 years, because it has to sort of network. It has to be an authentic build. We do over 300 events a year. Like every single day we're doing events somewhere in the world. And, that is all about liquid on lips. It's about partnerships. It's about cultural relevance. And frankly, a lot of brands don't want to do that hard work because it's a lot of shoe leather cost. But it's so important to sort of build an authentic brand.
Do you think there's a tension between that word authenticity and that community building aspect and the notion that, a spirits brand has to sell, right? It's one thing to go into, say, an account and truly form a partnership over time. And it's another to go in and say, what can we do to get this in a cocktail? How do you think about that kind of relationship between building long-term community and culture versus the short-term but necessary, sale building?
Yeah, we've generally sort of tried to steer away from that short-termism, and we get stung by it a lot of the time. I mean, we will spend time building with a bar, and we'll get into the well and the menu, and we'll be very happy. And I could give you real examples, like even just in the last couple of weeks, someone will come in and offer the bar $5,000 a month for 4 months, and suddenly we'll be out of the well, and they just bought us out of the well. And it's it's hard to sort of maintain it's hard to maintain your business when those strategies are sort of coming in, the short-term strategies. And one moment it'll be this mezcal, then this mezcal, and then the other mezcal. And when we see one mezcal come in and suddenly they're coming in with their checkbook, we know that they're going to be in for a couple of months and then they're going to be out. Because if they haven't done the core work to sort of build the brand, it constantly comes back. We've got this revolving doors of mezcals that go in to try and sort of take shelf space, get us moved here. But we always just end up bouncing back, because at the end of the day, and I say this is my hand on my heart, I'm not trying to sort of be, like showy about it, but the brand is strong enough to sort of, to sort of manage the waves of these deep pocketed people. And, you can only do that if you've sort of spent the time building authentic sort of culture and audience. The audience is always there.
When I look at Madre, I'm fascinated by the fact that the Madre universe encompasses not just mezcal, but now also a tequila and RTDs. Tell me a little bit about the product architecture, the SKUs, and the thinking behind kind of going wide.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because some brands have 5, 6, 7 different, mezcal SKUs, and we went a very, very different way. Well, I mean, the evolution of it was Ensemble came first, and then Espadin, then RTD came, and then tequila. So the quick evolution of that is Ensemble was our real premium play and is still the sort of the core product. That is the core sort of brand product. Espadin we launched to be more competitive within the bar space. We are 70% retail, by the way. So I think we're a very rare sort of combination for an early stage brand to be 70% retail. But, we found that there's so many brands coming in with cheaper mezcal, sort of running very low margins, trying to sort of compete for the well. And we couldn't really do that effectively with Ensemble, because there's a wild element to it. It's more expensive. But we produce an Espadin, which is more cost effective to sort of compete. And we also introduced a 1 liter, a version of that, to get the sort of $1 per ounce cost down. So Espadin is really our play towards the bar, in the well. I think it's important to sort of to have a product that makes sense for them. And the Ensemble is really more of a sipping ensemble. I have a lot of experience working in the beer space with Budweiser, Corona, primarily Stella, a couple of other brands. But really, the RTD for us was addressing a couple of things. Number one, getting more people into the overall mezcal sort of world. in an easy access way. It's definitely been successful in getting people to, taste mezcal, get into the flavor. A lot of people, come in through grapefruit. We have a mezcal RTD that's got a grapefruit enhancement, and they just like that entry. So it's brought a lot of people in. And I think of it as a pyramid. You're coming in at this sort of easy to access area and laddering up through the sort of product category. So, through a cocktail, maybe into a sipping mezcal. But the other thing about the RTD, which was strategically the intent, but has also worked out this way and works out on a regular basis, is it's a sessionable version of mezcal. It allows me more occasions to engage with Madre as a brand. I can go to festivals, a barbecue, a pool party. Out of Burning Man, there's like a 40-foot container with like 20 sort of pallets of desert water being distributed for people. It's their way of being able to sort of have a sessionable sort of drink. If you're out at a festival all day, you're not drinking mezcal all day, but I want people engaged with the brand. So that's been very successful. And we have a good festival and events program around it. And then that was the first like 4 years. And then last year we did add a tequila. I've always believed that people should understand that tequila is actually a mezcal. And, we get a lot of people who don't like so much of the smoke, and they kind of want something that's not smoked. And then you start to see smoked tequila happening over there. I'm like, isn't smoked tequila mezcal? You've got this whole like agave spirits portfolio coming together. I just believe the entire thing is mezcal. It's all like the agave spirits. Mezcal is effectively cooked agave, so for me, tequila was the natural sort of growth. And I saw another sort of opportunity here around the additive free space, because so much of the tequila, was not additive free. And everything that we did in the mezcal space and other brands, artisanal brands, it was the authentic way. There are people that have industrial mezcal, and I'm sure they sort of use sugars and things in there. But, for us, it was a natural sort of evolution, because I think the tequila space was moving towards the Cascawin, towards the Fortaleza, the G4s, these brands that had sort of got a very strong additive-free approach. We felt like a kinship to that. And that product's been great for us because it's actually brought the Madre brand onto the tequila shelf. It's opened up the name Madre to people who are buying tequila and started to switch people over. So we're seeing this sort of switch within Whole Foods. We see the sort of tequila mezcal switch, and it's been super exciting. And it's only early days. We've got some major sort of chains just taking on tequila. We've got full sort of carriage in the Albertsons, Vaughn's Pavilions world for tequila. And we haven't got full carriage after 3 years for the mezcals. So they've just gone straight away and said, we get it. We understand it. So yeah, very different strategy, but certainly one that's working for us right now. I won't say that every distributor and every investor has agreed with every one of my, decisions on this. And we've actually ended up, not taking big sort of significant investments from a couple of investors who just felt like they couldn't really like sort of live with the idea of having such a wide portfolio. But it's working for us, and we're very confident in the strategy.
Got it. On that investment front, Madre has been fortunate in that it's secured some sizable investments over the years. $3 million in 2021, another $3 million last year in 2024. I'm curious, those were very different fundraising environments. Did those experience in raising differ much from one another because of the general circumstances?
Well, I mean, the first one was a Series A at 21 million valuation back in sort of early days of the pandemic, and the second one was a convertible at $53 million valuation, just to give you a sort of sense of how things have sort of grown and spread. We've always been oversubscribed in our rounds. We've been very fortunate to have really good investment cohort around us. We have taken the approach of having many small investors. I have 140 investors in Madre. We don't have one big strategic that has a significant place in the in Madre. And, we felt this, even though that's been a lot of hard work, on my side, sort of building that community. We have these rabid fans, networks of fans who are investors and owners. And that's been very, that's been very, very good for us. I will say that, to the point more recently, certainly in the last round, I would say it was, a lot more people. It was slower getting to that, even though we ended up being oversubscribed. There was definitely a slower sort of environment for retail investors. People looking at interest rates and saying, well, I don't really need to invest over there when interest rates are like, 7%. But generally for us, I do understand the question. I would say generally for us, the brand has been exciting enough for people who still believe in the growth of the category for us to have achieved the financial objectives that we had relatively easily. So, I think we're fortunate in that regard.
Given the number of investors you have, what is that kind of brand founder investor working relationship like? Is it quarterly or monthly check-in via email? Are there just a few kind of core investors that you like to communicate with? How does it work when you have so many stakeholders that are vested in the growth and success of the brand that you're leading?
Yeah. I do a quarterly report for everyone, and I go into a fairly deep level of detail from the financials to the marketing to the industry. And, my investors really like that. I get a lot of positive feedback. So I'm always excited to sit down for a couple of days and dig in and wrap up the last 90 days. So I always do that. I have a small group of investors that are, more what I call my major investors or key holders, and then with those people, we share more detailed financials, and then we tend to sort of have more of a regular call.
Sure. Backing up and kind of looking at the category as a whole, right? As mezcal is growing, there still isn't, say, a brand that's reached 500,000 9-liter cases. Madre, though, is one of the top 4 and growing very fast. Can you give a little context? How big is Madre, either cases or sales? What's that like?
Yeah, I mean, we'll do about 36,000 9-liter cases this year. So, and we have round about 11% market share from what we can see, in the data that we can see. It's hard to say exactly what that number is, but you look at the Nielsen data as a reference, if you will. It's as good as we actually as good as we get. Yeah, so that's where we're at right now. That would be in terms of 9-liter equivalents, and we're growing. I think the category has been, not just the spirits category, has been challenged more recently. I think mezcal and tequila and RTD are doing better than most. But you're starting to see that pandemic slowdown is still with us. We're starting to see it thawing a little. So hopefully that will sort of, the rate of growth will improve.
Zooming in on how you kind of got to that size, I know that you are outspoken in your advocacy of the importance of velocity for drinks brands. I know this because you post publicly on LinkedIn about Madre's velocity and how it stands up to other brands and relates to them. I'm curious, why is this number or this metric so important to you?
And brand health, brand salience, right? I mean, you have a product in a store, it's the speed at which that sells that is most important to a retailer. To a buyer, they want to see velocity. They want to see it move off the shelf. When I go into a store and I see one bottle of Madre left and every other sort of facing is full, I'm happy. I'm also sort of disappointed because I also want to make sure they don't run out. That is what we see. And I'm very proud of it. And the reason I continually sort of present those numbers, we've been, I think out of the last 45 months, 42 of them, we've been number 1 in retail velocity. And the other quarter, 400 Conejos was number 1 in retail velocity. And I put a lot of that down to the fact they have a lot higher SKUs. I have a 1.75 liter SKU and 1 liter SKU. So, velocity is important because it basically tells you how much people like the product. It's as simple as that. It doesn't sit. It goes through. Inventory has to move. And if inventory's sitting, which is a big part of the issue right now for the industry, post-pandemic inventory levels are still really high. So CFOs are looking and saying, you don't have any open to buy because I have $1 million of mezcal over there. I'm like, is that the mezcal that's actually selling? Or is that the mezcal that you're sitting on that you can't get rid of? We've actually started to see buying patterns with our distributors change, where they used to sort of hold sort of more inventory. Now they're on like 7-day quick turnaround. So we're like this. We get many more smaller orders because of this inventory sort of restraints until that opens up, and hopefully by the end of next year, it'll open up a bit more. Maybe we'll get back to those numbers. But yeah, for me, velocity says everything about brand health, brand salience, brand love.
So that begs the question, when you're already number one in velocity as Madre is, do you focus on increasing that further? Or is there a secondary metric that you look at achieving since you kind of already accomplished, the near impossible of getting to number one in velocity?
Yeah, volume. It's kind of the trick, really, because it's easier to maintain velocity when you're relatively higher priced than others, because every bottle is generating more revenue, and the velocity metric is the amount of money that people that people turn over in the store. So volume is obviously where we need to grow. So volume times velocity. If you can have high volume and high velocity, you're the number one brand in the world. If you have high volume and low velocity, you could be the number one by volume and, have low velocity, so it's really this sort of balance. I'll give you an example of where we're at with volume and why volume is our next metric is to grow volume. We have got to a certain place through this cultural influence base. We have a very strong cultural base, but it's almost a glass ceiling that you need to break through in order to sort of really address the mainstream. That's volume. We're in about 10% of the stores that Del Maguey's in, right? If you look at the Nielsen numbers, they scan 12,000 stores. Del Maguey and Ilegal are in 8,000 or 9,000 of those. 400 Conejos in 6 or 7. We're in less than 1,000 of those scanned stores. The good thing is our velocity is high, so it says we are, we are moving quickly through the stores that carry. But then you've also got to sort of, grow the volume as well. So the challenge for us and the opportunity is how do we start to sort of, that delta of like 5, 6, 7,000 stores is our opportunity. And when I sit with a strategic and we talk to the strategics about potential partnership, acquisition, that we have those conversations. For me, it's having that sort of that strategic with the broad shoulders that can really take this powerful brand that has very strong cultural resonance and grow it using their distribution, their strategy, etc. So, whilst we've built what we've built through this sort of tools that we know, that volume piece takes a skill set that's kind of, I wouldn't say it's beyond us, but actually having, people that are really in that sort of scalable business is really where the opportunity is. We'll always sort of try to treat the brand, with our audience. We'll always try to maintain the brand at that level to maintain the sort of the velocity.
I'm grateful for you allowing me to do this kind of deep dive on velocity with you. I'm curious, this is my last question on the topic. When it comes to Madre's journey, it didn't start out as number one in velocity. Were there certain sales, marketing, distribution tactics that helped you get to that place that you think are, worth noting?
Brand is a lot more important than people will think. One very big partner with one of our distributors basically asked them for some of the Madre magic, right? They wanted the Madre, whatever you do for Madre. I'm not going to say who it was, but they wanted some of the Madre magic. And the distributor, the president of sales, said, "We can't give you the Madre magic. The Madre magic is Madre." They've created this sort of community. It's like, we don't do anything. We actually just put it in the stores. And people think there's some way that you can buy in or whatever. And it's not. It's really about building the brand. And I think the velocity continues to sort of be strong within the chains as we've transitioned from independent stores and bars, but the independent stores, which is where our natural sort of, essence is, the Flask and Fields, the high-low liquors, these type of incredible independent brands. As we've transitioned to the chains, it's one thing having a brand that they know, but I think a lot of people don't know the brand but they are looking at tequila and mezcal, and they look at the visual brand and they say, I don't really know this brand, but it feels like the one for me. It feels authentic. It feels timeless in a way. It's why we say desde siempre, since forever. It feels timeless. So I think the brand itself does an incredible amount of the work just by the visual identity of it. I mean, we hear this from retailers time and time again, so that would probably be my best answer for that.
Fair. I'm curious when it comes to that shoe leather aspect, when it comes to activations or, digital presence, either or. I'm curious if there's an area that you think Madre gets the most bang for its buck.
We definitely have a strategy that we followed for many years, and I touched on it before. It really is grassroots marketing. It's not sexy. I mean, it's sexy in as much as it's fun, because it's a lot of events, it's a lot of activations. We have a lot of brand partners in music, in fashion, in accessories, galleries, festivals. We have a culture marketing team. Their job is to immerse the brand in culture. We've done things that haven't worked. We've tried advertising. We never get the ROI for the amount of spend. We tried direct to consumer brand marketing. That kind of didn't go anywhere. We've certainly tried a lot of different things, but the things that have worked for us is it's about grassroots, but also influencers. We have a very different influencer strategy. My investors are always asking me like, are we going to get an influencer? And I'm like, well, who am I going to get? Who would my influencer be? I don't know, like FKA Twigs, Tom Yore, Willie Nelson. I don't know. But I'll tell you who our influencers are. Our influencers are micro influencers. They're niche influencers. And we have done this from day one. This is going back, way into like 2016, 2017. You won't know the name of the influencers that are helping drive this brand, because they're not Kim Kardashian. They're not sort of million person followers. They are people that are influencers in their community, in the New York gallery scene, in the LA sort of surf fashion scene, in the London graphic design scene. We're in all of those scenes. So we have a list of influencers. You could post it on the site, and I can assure you that most of the people listening to this podcast wouldn't know any of them. But in the aggregate, they've created Madre as being an important part of their community, and their community is a mirror of what's happening in that city. And people look in at that sort of community and they take it out. It's like this ripple effect, and you don't see it. You can never really see it, but it's happening if you continue to fuel it. And you have to have the confidence that is happening. And again, this comes back from experiences in the fashion industry. I was in the jeans business for many years. In the music industry, we would launch. I worked for Jimmy Iovine and Dr. Dre at Interscope Records. We launch new artists all the time, but you can't just launch a new artist and expect everyone to know it. You have to get into the local communities and build it. It's a strategy that most strategic spirit companies, and actually sort of founders in spirits don't love. People will ask me to give them some advice on how we built the brand and all of this. And I'm always happy to chat to people. I love hearing their stories as well. And I'm very consistent about telling the slow roll story. And most people understand it, but they just can't do it. They haven't got the capital to do it. They haven't got the connections to do it. Maybe they don't have the brand strength. People aren't really that excited about the brand. There's a lot of things that have to go to make the entire meal work, right? Like every aspect of the meal, the entree, the dessert, the wine, everything has to go together. The chef, the sous chef, everything has to come together in this sort of, in this way. And that's kind of just the way you have to do it, I think.
Yeah. No, I think that's both eye-opening to some, as there are no shortcuts, right? But that should also be comforting is with the right resources, planning and luck, right? It is possible. And I love your point. And if you could touch on this a little more or dive into it a little deeper, from what I've read, these micro and nano influencers obviously have less of a broad audience, but their connection to that audience, that engagement, tends to be much stronger than that of the macro influencer or the celebrity influencer at large. Has that been your experience?
100%. And every bit of research, you sit down with, we do little research groups with, people in late 20s, early 30s. They're all following what we would call nano influencers. This idea that they're all following. Okay, you've got your Joe Rogans and your Hubermans and you've got all of those, but that's not where they're really getting their information from. Those people don't feel close enough to them. They don't feel credible enough to them in their sort of communities. It's deeply psychographic. It's not sort of demographic. It's very psychographic. And that's where people are getting their influence from. It's all about the communities that they build around them. And, a brand has to sit within the entire consumer journey. So you need to understand your consumer and see what the touch points are. And it's not just the places that they go or the parties that they go to or the friends' houses that they expect to see the bottle on. It's their nano influencer saying, this is Madre, I have Madre, or it's, that's the sponsor, Madre is the sponsor of a party that they go to. It's the entire customer journey. There's no silver bullet for that.
I hear a lot of enthusiasm and excitement, and it's understandable given the growth and success of Madre thus far. But the industry at large does face a lot of headwinds. I'm curious from a business perspective, if anything keeps you up at night.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I'd say the last 18 months have been really tough. The thing that sort of gives us some confidence in such tough times is having a brand that is strong enough to sort of, to ride the waves is good, because you're certainly seeing a lot of casualties along the way. Obviously is an issue. Fortunately, we've kind of dodged it twice, and now we're sort of delayed till November. We made about 18% margin gains through better buying, a lot of stuff we did in Oaxaca distribution, and we were figuring that we'd have to give up most of those margin gains to tariffs. Is tariffs going to come in? Is it going to be 30%? Is it not going to come in? Is it going to eradicate our margin gain? We had a goal to get to 55% margin by December this year, and we were well on our way. So, the thing with tariffs is we don't know if we're going to have to carry all the costs. Distributors aren't excited about carrying the costs. Retailers are like, okay, well, we just mark it up anyway. Are people going to be buying $80 bottles of Madre in 6 months? I really don't know. I will say, though, that whilst the industry's been hard, I think the challenges are for us is we would love to have a strategic partner or like someone to really help us go to the next level. And we're doing it our way. We're profitable. We're running it our way, but we don't have like tens of millions of dollars to invest in sort of expansion. And we do want to be the number one mezcal in the world. And we think we can be. We need a partner for that. And unfortunately, I think because of interest rates, because of inventory levels, because of some of the concerns over, moderation in drinking, the industry has been challenged. And I don't think the opportunities are there for us right now as to be able to sort of, we'd love them to be, but there doesn't seem to be as much openness to acquiring, 40, 50,000 case brands that, we would love that. We're safe. We're in a good place because we're profitable. We can roll. If we're still here at, independent in 5 years time, maybe we will be. We would like to sort of grow more quickly than that. But at the same time, I'm really positive about this industry. You look at Warren Buffett spending billions of dollars and buying up sort of shares in the big strategics. Why is that? Because their share price is off 30, 50% off these, basically because they're not hitting pandemic numbers. But actually, if you look at a linear sort of growth from 2015 to today, the business is growing pretty normally. If you look at it in 10 years' time, it'll just look like there was a blip called a pandemic and it'll flow through. I think Warren Buffett's got it right. There is moderation in drinking, but people are drinking better. So we're happy because they're drinking more premium. They're drinking, they're drinking in moderation, but they're still drinking. And they're in a world where AI starts to sort of dominate more and more. IRL experiences are going to become even more important. So I believe IRL is going to be, very important going forward. I think the more that sort of digital and AI sort of takes over, it's going to sort of drive things. I don't think you're going to see the same level of binge drinking that you used to see in like the sort of younger market. But you're seeing premium, thoughtful, mindful drinking. And I think we're well positioned to play in that space.
I'm curious, in our conversation, you mentioned Nielsen, you mentioned psychographics, you mentioned focus groups and studies. When it comes to data, is there any particular place you like to turn? Do you aggregate a number of sources? Are there any free or public sources that you find yourself looking at time and time again? How do you think about data?
Well, VIP is really important to us. I think it's an incredible product for the industry, and we're slice and dice everything we can in VIP. So that's important. VIP really works more in sort of cases, and we want to understand depletion values and wholesale values. So we've also built our own back end around wholesale, value, depletion value, etc. And I think a lot of the information and detail that you need on your company, you have to build that as well. I think a lot of people just rely on VIP, but don't have as much transparency on the data as we do. I have an incredible CFO that's been able to sort of build this dedicated back end for us. So that's important. Nielsen, I think, is important. I know it doesn't tell the whole picture, but it's the only thing that you have that shows some consistent, month on month, data. I'm investigating CGA right now, which is, the Nielsen organization's way of being able to pull in on-trade data as well as off-trade data. And they're doing that through point of sale. It's not perfect yet, but it's definitely moving in the right direction. And we really appreciate the fact that they're doing it, because to give us the on-trade, off-trade balance, I think is important. And then what else do we use? I find that the market, the research in the industry is so bad. I mean, you could look at the sort of, ask me how big the Mezcal market is. You can go anything from 300 million to 2 billion. I'm like, yeah, that's quite a spread. It's interesting. There's not that much great data on, from that perspective, but VIP is definitely the most important thing to know.
Good to know. Good to know. In wrapping things up, I'm just curious what you see for the future of Madre Mezcal, whether it be, something you're doing in the next year, or how you'd like to imagine the brand evolving over the next decade. When your future self looks back, where is Madre headed?
I think I've always had this vision that the early years, which you say was still in, is really establishing a strong brand. I want to get the brand to a place when we sort of have, a strategic partner that can take us to 500,000 cases. And we want that. We absolutely will need someone to sort of help us grow this brand. I think it's a strategic, but is it private equity? Whatever, maybe. There is a future for us. I want this brand to be the number one mezcal by volume and velocity. I don't think we're going to be able to do that by ourselves. So somewhere along the line, I think there's a partner that makes sense. We make sense for their portfolio. They may have a mezcal. They may not have a mezcal. They may have a mezcal that doesn't cover all of the sort of different aspects of the opportunity. So I think there's a partner for us in the future, but I think we continue to sort of grow the brand to make sure that the brand is solid. I think that what I don't want to do is I would not want, and we've had sort of offers and conversations to acquire the company or do different things. We're like, no, if we did this right now, the brand is nowhere near solid enough. And you go into a strategic where they're focused much more on volume, tonnage. They're not focused on the brand in the same way as we are. And that's good for us because we are good at that. We're not great at sort of taking it to 1 million cases. They're good at taking it to 1 million cases. So if we can make sure that the brand is solid in the consumer's mind, I think that's what I see in the future. How far away that is, I don't know. I think the macroeconomic environment is going to sort of hopefully ease. I think some of the acquisition appetite, is going to grow with the strategics over time. I think interest rates are going to come down. There's going to be more availability of acquisition cash, and I think hopefully people will start to, if the mezcal tequila market continues to grow, the RTD market is growing. It's growing more than anything else. I think if these trends continue, I think we'll be we'll be a good acquisition target. And I think finding the right partner will be, what we need to do. And hopefully I'll look back in 5 or 10 years and say, we established a great brand. We found a strategic partner that really believed in us, and we grew, and we've now got the #1 mezcal brand in the world. That's what I want to achieve out of this.
Chris, thank you so much for your time again today and all your really insightful thoughts. Really appreciate you joining us on Business of Drinks.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Welcome back to Last Call. I'm Erica. Today I'm here with Aaron McVickers, who leads the spirits vertical at Three Tier Beverages, which, if you're not already familiar with them, they're a data consultancy that partners with NIQ and VIP to help brands navigate what's happening in the drink space. And we're going to be discussing a recent report that the Three Tier Beverages put out called Buzz or Bust: The Shelf Life of the RTD Spirits Craze. So, Aaron, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start out talking about the big picture here. The report delves into how the RTD category has evolved across beer, wine, and spirits-based products over the past few years. What are the biggest shifts that you're seeing in terms of share and growth among these three categories, and what's driving those changes?
Yeah, Erica. So we're seeing significant movement across those ready-to-drink categories. Consumers are not loyal to just one format. So they're kind of, piquing their curiosity and trial across the category. So across beer and wine and spirits in terms of exploration. And so malt-based ready-to-drinks peaked probably back in 2019. But consumers' interest, it remains, and it's really driven by like subsegments. So if we think about hard teas and lemonades in that malt space, that's really kind of the ebb and flow there. For spirits-based ready-to-drink, they peaked in about 2020, and they've since moderated a bit, with growth continuing, but it's a bit at a slower pace than we've seen in the past. And then meanwhile, ready-to-drink wine-based cocktails, they've seen a recent resurgence. And they're really led by brands like Buzzballs and Beatbox. And those two brands account for about 60% of that segment. So they're quite large. And as you know, they innovate with flavors all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. One section of the report looks at how prepared cocktails are now driving most of the overall spirits category growth, even as some of the other subcategories flatten out. So what does this tell us about how consumers are drinking? And how is this playing out in the on-premise versus off-premise channels?
Yeah. So the on-premise locations, they're increasing their introduction of spirits-based ready-to-drinks, which are pretty fastly gaining traction and taking share from primarily hard seltzers and FMBs. And this is really mirroring trends that we see in the off-premise. And within the spirits prepared cocktails, ready-to-drink accounts for about 44% of the category sales, while ready-to-serve remains relatively small at around 5% in the on-premise. So you're definitely starting to see some impact in the on-premise that you are also seeing in the off.
Yeah, definitely. The report also included a really interesting snapshot of the spirits RTD consumer that I thought people would be interested in hearing, talking about their age, their income, their lifestyle. So can you paint that picture for us? Who is this shopper and what does a day in their life look like?
Yeah. So if we look at it from a total US perspective, the spirits-based ready-to-drink consumer tends to be predominantly Caucasian and higher income, spanning a wide range from millennials to a little bit older generation. And it's likely driven by trial and category buzz. People are very interested in the category. So all that being said, millennials do make up a significant share of that age group. And with about half of them reporting spirits-based ready-to-drink purchases. So the lifestyles and shopping habits align with this trend. They're active in experiences like Black theater, concerts, youth sports, and they shop at more premium retailers such as Trader Joe's and Whole Foods that will attract a similar demographic profile. So these types of activities and shopping habits are all ones suppliers should lean into when targeting the right consumer for ready-to-drink spirits.
Yeah, definitely. That totally speaks to the occasions. RTDs are so good to take to any of these occasions.
Totally. Absolutely. So why not have that there for them already?
Exactly. And it was also eye-opening to see the number of spirits-based RTD SKUs that those had grown 50% since 2021. So that kind of leads me to add, are we reaching a point of overcrowding? And how would you say that retailers are thinking about managing all of these products on the shelf?
Yes, it's so true. I mean, it is very eye-opening to see just the number of SKUs that are being entered into this category. And with so many products hitting the shelves, retailers, they're really under pressure to make tough choices. Underperformers are going to get replaced fast. And so to win, brands need to stand out. They need to stand out with innovation, packaging that pops, strong trial and repeat strategies, and really clear, compelling stories that tell them apart. If we think about our demographic, profile for these products, you know, those are the ones that want that compelling story. They want to be able to resonate with these brands and resonate with everything about them, whether it's flavor and what have you. So, really, you're going to need to be able to prove and stand out on shelf and showcase how you're going to bring profit to those retailers.
Yeah, definitely. And also, I would say the flavor data, this really jumped out to me. So teas and lemonades, they definitely seem to be having a moment. But then also flavors like cherry limeade and spicy mango are on the rise. So, what's behind those trends? And where do you think what does it signal about where flavor innovation is heading?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing is, teas and lemonades, they're really having a moment with brands like Surfside, Sun Cruiser. They're really gaining momentum. And these teas and lemonades, and not specific to those brands, but they're capturing the largest dollar volume and fastest growth rate, accounting for nearly three quarters of the top growth flavors. So retailers are really paying attention to this, and they're also innovating in these spaces, other beverage spaces or other category spaces with similar concepts. One thing that I saw at Publix, I live down here in South Florida, and I saw a yuzu habanero lemonade. I mean, so this stuff is really gaining traction. And at the same time, I think spicy flavors are trending. It's likely fueled by summer consumption. But then also these profiles attract consumers seeking these unique taste experience, and suppliers are responding with spicy, sweet innovations. I just read an article about Beatbox coming out with a cheladas next year, which has got a sweet, salty, spicy flavor to it. So I'm interested to track that and see how that does. It's a really interesting, concept. And then as we move into some cooler months, it'll be interesting to see how flavor preferences evolve, right? And so early signs point to growth in winter flavors like peppermint, white Russian, old fashioned, tamarind coffee, and hazelnut. So there's all these I think some seasonality that goes along with it as well that will be interesting to see how it kind of plays out in the next 3 months or so.
Love it. Well, I for one am ready for my peppermint barks and all of those cozy flavors of winter. Well, I think that's a great place for us to leave it. So, Erin, thank you so much for joining us on Business of Drinks.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
And thanks also to our listeners for joining us. Follow Business of Drinks on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you're listening, and tap the notification button so you'll be the first to know when a new episode drops. And help us spread the word. Click the star ratings and share on social. It really does help us find new listeners. Finally, if there's something you'd like us to cover on the podcast, tell us. We're at podcast@businessofdrinks.com or reach out via Instagram or LinkedIn. We want to hear from you, and we really do respond to messages. See you next time.